If this camera stops now that we're actually recording, I'm gonna be very mad. Good day, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Gen-Z Unfiltered. I'm Ishkirat, and the topic we're covering today is something we all have and sometimes we fail to recognize, something that we've been hearing about increasingly in the past few years, even the past few days, all over social media, and that is privilege. Before we get started, I would like to remind everyone that Gen-Z Unfiltered is now available in podcast form by the name Gen-Z Unfiltered Canada on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Podcast Addict, so make sure to go check us out there. And if that's where you're listening to us, hello, and welcome to Gen-Z Unfiltered. So today on the topic, I am joined by someone much more experienced than me. So with your warm welcome, please welcome Roop.
Hi. I like that intro. It doesn't say much older than me. It says much more experienced than me.
Experience, of course. Age is an experience. It's wisdom that you bring to our show today. How are you?
I am good. Thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you for the privilege of having me. No, privilege is mine. So yes. Thank you for making me feel so privileged to be here today, to be a part of Gen Z Unfiltered. Thank you.
Oh, you are more than welcome, and you are always welcome to join us. As I said, you carry with you experience and thoughts that we perhaps wouldn't. And I guess with that, I would like to acknowledge, this is a disclaimer. Yes, we are talking about privilege, but it is a topic that goes far beyond something me or Roop could cover alone. It requires lots of depth and lots of research. Episode today is only 10 to 20 minutes long and cannot cover all of that. With that, the first most important step to this episode, in my opinion, would be defining privilege. So Roop, what do you think privilege is? Or for you, how is it defined?
For me, privilege in current times is the privilege of Canada sitting on vaccines. And this is a conversation that we're having often in our home with our family, friends, that there are countries in the world that are starving for vaccines, countries like Nepal that don't have any vaccines whatsoever. And here we are in Canada sitting on spares and incentivizing our population with lotteries, with prizes, and hoping that people would go get vaccinated. And yet there are people who are choosing not to get vaccinated. If that isn't privilege, then what is privilege?
Privilege being something you are just sometimes you have, and it's not something you work for necessarily. So privilege is a power that shouldn't be abused, as any power, and power corrupts. And the fact that we are having this conversation today means that that power is in question for its corruption. Privilege is a power that is being used in ways that it shouldn't be by a species such as humans who are known for or should be at the least known for humanity. You know, having the benefits that we have or the advantages we have, the state of being able to just use them to grow and to move forward is a privilege. And as you said, acknowledging privilege is step one, because we've recognized that having privilege is a problem, especially when you have too much of it while someone else is struggling from you using it incorrectly. An obvious example, as you gave, is the vaccine situation that we're in right now. In the middle of a pandemic, I think we're hopefully close to the end now, but throughout the pandemic, we've obviously seen so much of this privilege come out. People who've been able to stay comfortably in their homes and have resources while others are still going out. Frontline workers are still working and are still under danger. And privilege goes beyond that. Some obvious examples we've heard of is having access to food, safety, water, Wi-Fi even today. Or just having a little more money than someone else, because money can go a long way in the day and age we live here. And privilege on a smaller scale, in micro community sense, goes to savings, having the ability to take out a loan or mortgage, having the ability to go to a friend's house, having choice in dinner, the clothing you wear, walking down the street, little things that you do every day that you don't think about being a privilege. Like the fact we're sitting here having this conversation is a privilege. Like, I'm not afraid right now that someone's gonna come in and just kill me. It's a privilege. And I guess, why do you think it's important to talk about it? Because it's obvious the privilege is a problem and it exists. But why would you say it's important to acknowledge it, step one? And what can you do with that privilege going forward once you've recognized it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to congratulate you for even thinking about this, because whatever you just said resonates with me. And I think back to when I was your age. I don't know if I ever really thought of privilege at that time. So this is more commonplace than it was when I was growing up. So I'm so glad that this generation is taking the lead on it. And we hear or we read about checking my privilege on social media quite a bit these days.
Mm-hmm.
And there are, I have friends in my age group or older people who probably don't understand what that really means or entails. And that's probably because how we were raised, and we were not really opening our minds to these thoughts. And I'm being very honest here. So that is changing, that is evolving. And I'm glad that your generation is having these conversations, and I'm glad to be a part of these conversations as well. So from the way I see it, I don't want to frame privilege as something just solely as something that causes for someone else to be at a disadvantage because of me. I think it's also important to remember that it's my privilege that's putting me at an advantage over others. I feel that I need to acknowledge that, because it helps me put myself in a place of empathy where I try to understand others' individual experiences based on that information, that they may not have had the same opportunities that I've had. Of course, everyone goes through hardships in life. It doesn't mean having privilege doesn't mean that you're not going to go through any hardships. Everyone goes through hardships in life, but still there will be many advantages that we have not earned. Like you say that we have clean air, we have clean water, which a lot of people in this country still don't have. Mm-hmm. Which you probably have read about. The indigenous communities in this country still don't have access to clean water. So we have those privileges in our life, and we have the privilege of going to school. We have the privilege of getting an education. We have a privilege to have this platform where we can have this conversation. So all of these things we need to take into account and be empathetic. So I think that really, for me, that's the key. That is very important. That's very crucial in building those relationships, the intersectional relationships that we need to build in our communities. And also the systemic racism that we talk about, or the systemic inequities, the systemic inequalities, the power imbalances in the society. I think that can be healed, or we can work towards creating a more equitable society if we start checking our privilege. So I think that's also where it comes in handy. What do you think?
Well, privilege is a problem, and privilege is also the solution to it. That's where I stand. I think personally, privilege for me is a very heavy topic, especially after the pandemic, because I have turned out to have a different perspective on things. Because the number of times that I've the privilege of planning is where I'm going to say, privilege of knowing that, hey, tomorrow I can do this, and then I can do this. And then all of a sudden, the virus can really just put an end to it. So a simple example of this at most basic form is, oh, I'm going to school next week. I'll have this. And then after school, I can do this. And then I can go to work. There we go. That's a privilege, comfortably thinking about that. And that privilege is under attack when I'm put into isolation from a close contact. I had a lot of experience with it, but that form of privilege is obviously not to compare it to the awful things that can sometimes happen with things like living in a war zone or not having access to food and water and all those basic necessities. But that really made me think about how much of a privilege I actually have. Yes, I'm a person of color, but even then, the fact that I am I'm a first-generation immigrant, and the fact that I don't have to think about, will I have food today or not? Will I be able to drink clean water? Do I have a right to school? The people I'm surrounded by, the fact that I have access to quite an exceptional healthcare. All these things are privilege. And for me, the question, privilege is important because I become afraid of it. As I said earlier, privilege is a power, and if it turns out to be used in the wrong way, I have to live here, right? So the future, if privilege doesn't turn out to play in the right way, if it doesn't go as humans or humanity would desire, it could really bring the world to the brink of possible extinction. Because when you have privilege, there's, as of right now, what I see, two outcomes. The first one is those with privilege are using it just to bring themselves higher, or those with privilege refuse to do anything to bring those without privilege anywhere near them. Because capitalism has created this competitive nature where everyone's just working to grow on their privilege and just get more of it and just keep gaining. But we forget that there's no point in just a small group of people excelling if everyone else is suffering. The idea that we want to watch others suffer, to me, is pathetic in its extremist sense. So I'm afraid of privilege. That's why I think it's important. And I think this kind of goes off course of why I think it's important to acknowledge it. But as a Gen Z,
I think you're afraid of unchecked privilege.
Yes, I am afraid of unchecked privilege. Thank you for clearing that. Yeah, I guess. Afraid of unchecked privilege because you don't know where it's going to end. I guess the simplest example here is the fact so many people, like in the past year, so much has gone on. And BLM, farmers' protests, the Palestine movement, and all of this, and the number of people, including ourselves, right? We weren't there in the war zone. We'll never know what it feels like to be there. But the fact that we could turn on the TV, see something awful, and turn it off just because we didn't like it, that's a privilege. Posting about it on social media does not necessarily solve the issue. It's great that we're trying to do the whole thing of, letting people know and raising awareness, but on its own, it's nothing. But people on the higher level where they have that privilege to take a step, if they're not recognizing it and they're not taking the steps necessary to bring forward to a more equitable future, I'm afraid of where the world might end up with that.
World's not going to go anywhere because it's always been the same.
It's always been the same. That's
so don't worry. let's de-stress you there. So let's take that stress away. That nothing's going to. We're not going.
I'm hopeful for the future. I think it's at least from my generation. I think the fact we're having this conversation about recognizing it is a great step towards a better future. In the hope, because once you recognize it, you want to use it for the betterment of society. You want to use it for the betterment of future. So I guess to directly answer the question, why is it important to acknowledge privilege? Because you can use it to make a better tomorrow.
Well, I am hopeful because I see your generation asking these questions, thinking about it critically. And I repeatedly keep telling you, I talk to Roop about the same thing, that I'm very proud of you. I'm very proud of you that you're able to articulate your thoughts. You're able to think about these things. And I'm always like sitting behind and watching like a proud parent whose kids are doing. I love it. I love it. I mean, it doesn't matter what also another thing that's really important for younger children or younger youth to remember is that whatever thoughts that you form today may not be the same tomorrow. You will evolve with time. Everybody does. Your thoughts will change. Your experiences will mold them in a different way. The path that you're on might not be a path that you're on in 5 years from now, but that is okay. As long as you have an open mind about it, as long as you're thinking about everything critically around you, which you are. So I think checking the privilege comes into that domain as well, is just thinking critically about what you have and what others don't have because you have it, or perhaps they just don't have it. And their lack of opportunity is holding them back from where you are. So someone, let's say we talked about an immigrant from India who has come to this country, has the potential, has the education, but does not have the Canadian experience to be able to succeed at the same level as someone who was born and raised in Canada. That is privilege. And we need to acknowledge that, and we need to be more empathetic towards that person. And we need to start working to change the system to accommodate people who have the potential and who could be, God knows, cure cancer.
Privileged people have the ability to notice the fact that they need change, and unless we because we are the privileged people. And unless we are able
Not
to
always.
look at the
Not always.
Not always, but in the general most, I guess, sense of having the basic, you have the basic necessities, you have less to think about in terms of survival, I guess.
Yeah, but there's again a privilege of race, privilege of color, privilege of gender, privilege of sexual orientation. And for us, for women of color, we're disadvantaged when it comes to the privilege of color. We're disadvantaged when it comes to privilege of gender. We're disadvantaged multiple arenas. But at the same time, yes, acknowledging where we are privileged, that's also very important, because if we're expecting other people to acknowledge their privilege, we should also be acknowledging our privilege. I think that is important.
Absolutely. So I think from this to our viewers or listeners, wherever you are right now, take this moment to realize why you are privileged. Everyone has some sense of privilege. And I guess with that, Roop, do you ever feel guilty about having privilege? I know personally it's not something I feel guilty about, but I think it's something to be grateful about.
Yeah. Guilt is an emotion that just wastes your energy. I am who I am. I was born where I was. It was not my choice. It was not my choice that my parents chose to raise us in Canada. This is where it is. Yes, it is unfortunate. It is unfair for someone who is in, let's say, a slum in Bombay and does not have access to clean water, does not have access to education. And it is definitely not fair. And I want to work to build a more equitable society. But am I feeling guilty about who I am? I don't think so. And I don't think it helps in breaking down or dismantling the system of systemic oppression by any means. So I don't think we should be carrying that guilt or feel guilty or even defensive, for that matter, when we're talking about privilege.
Privilege is a very deep topic that I would say goes on, as I said earlier, very many depths. But from this episode, please, everybody, acknowledge your privilege. Look at the privilege you have, even that you don't have. And if you have the privilege of being able to maybe donate money, volunteer some time, help someone just by carrying their groceries, give them someone a smile, or voting, some things as basic as these, use those basic privileges in order to make sure that the steps you take are building the future that you want to see for yourself or for your children. The more equitable future that we're always talking about, because we know we need change. But who's going to bring that change is no one other than us.
And thank you so much for bringing this topic. Thank you so much for thinking about this.
Thank you for joining me here today and bringing, as I said earlier, your experiences, because I've learned a lot. I would say we often talk about things, we have our opinions, but the more you hear from others, or having the privilege of hearing from others, use that to build better opinions, seeing a different side of things. With that, I would like to say thank you, Roop, for joining me today. And thank you, everyone, for viewing or listening. Join us again on next Wednesday. And until then, peace out.
And I would also say, use your privilege of internet, power, having a phone to leave a comment and tell us what you think your privileges are.
Yeah, share in the comments. Why are you privileged?
Yeah, why are you privileged? How are you privileged?
And how do you plan on using that privilege? All right. With that, everybody, peace out.
Peace out.